All right, welcome back to Coalition Purple. Hey, John.
Hey, good to see you.
How's it going? Hey, we've got an opportunity here. One of the things we're really trying to do a lot more in 2025 is to hear from other voices besides John and me. I think we're getting tired of hearing each other's voices. So we'd like to welcome Ken Good, who's one of our first guests here, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And Ken's a real focus area is on the topic of bail reform. And that's one of those issues I personally think has an opportunity to bring some people together if they can just sort of talk through the issues. So what we'd like to start out with, Ken, is first of all, just give us a little bit of background about you, how you got involved in this whole area of bail reform, and then we'll go from there.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. So I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for, I kind of hate to admit how long, 30-something years, probably 30, closer to 35. I think this is the 35th year.
Yeah.
I started out practicing law, representing doctors in hospitals when they got sued, but I have always had a lot of interest in appellate work, so legal type issues. And so a bail bondsman got in trouble, and so he asked somebody, what kind of attorney do you need for this type of issue? And they said, well, you need an appellate attorney. And so that's what started my path down this road. I helped him out. I kind of clicked with the industry. Word of mouth spread. I represent several insurance companies statewide for Texas. And I'm on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I'm on the legislative team. We propose bills. I testify for the legislature. But then in addition to all that, I was asked to attend a federal hearing on one of these cases years and years ago, and I came out really upset because I thought the judge was making the wrong ruling. She was applying the wrong standard, and I thought she was just wrong. And so I came out setting off the alarms and saying we have to become experts on these issues. And so over time, I've concentrated on becoming familiar with the legal issues. I've written numerous articles in this area of the law, and I've been proven correct. The judge on that case has been reversed 7 or 8 or more times by the appellate court on this case. And the federal court finally said that case, the original one, should have never been filed in federal court. And that's one of those really important cases that kind of has badly influenced bail reform across the country. And so we're just now coming out of this bad period and righting the ship so that we can get back on the right track and get crime under control.
So just a quick question for me, just having listened to you talk about that case. Well, I guess the first thing is you're not just involved in the court systems in Texas, you're involved also in California and other places too, correct?
Well, I'm not going to say I'm involved. I look at those issues. I have a podcast where I've had guests involving with those issues. So I'm not going to say that I'm involved in California and other states, but I do write articles about them.
Okay. So my question basically just generally is, what are the issues with bail reform that you feel like are really affecting the community? And especially because we hear about these issues in California, and I've read some things that you've written that involve California. So just give us sort of an overview of why you think that the bail reform issue is so serious and why it affects so many people.
Well, first, since I'm from Texas, I feel like we've done really good bail reform. So I always like to distinguish between bad bail reform and good bail reform, because I don't want my legislature or my legislators that I know to think that I'm calling what they've done as bad bail reform, because there's a big difference. And good bail reform highlights and emphasizes accountability. Bad bail reform decriminalizes, gets rid of accountability, and gives a green light for people to commit more crime. And you mentioned California. The way that was done is, we start out with a proposition that says we're going to change certain felonies to misdemeanors, including theft under $950, and then it passes. But the argument when it was being considered was we're going to change it from felonies to misdemeanors. They still are going to have to respond, and they're going to have to be accountable, but they'll be able to find jobs. Well, then once it passes, DAs like Gascon in LA decides, and in other places, I'm not going to prosecute theft under $950 anymore. And because it's a standard of living issue, or it's a living issue, it's not really a real crime. And so we see shoplifting skyrocket. We see stores closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. We see commercial property values dropping like a stone because the communities are no longer safe. And so we see you can see the impact of bad bail reform immediately. And the problem we would have had a backlash on this 2 years ago in the last federal election, but the politicians they said, oh, it's not really an issue. Crime is really going down. Look at the FBI statistics. And so now 2 years later, right before this election, the FBI comes out that the statistics have been updated, changed, whatever you want to call it, and now we know crime is going up. And still they're not complete. They're still just a portion of the data. And so you can see that the backlash that we're having now is going to be much worse because it's been delayed through collusion and misrepresentation.
Sorry, I know I'm sort of throwing the questions out here at the moment, but you're hitting on things that I think are very interesting. So one of the things that I've always been confused about as far as like where bail comes from is there seems to be different groups involved in determining how bail is applied. There's the legislature that passes the laws. There's the judges that make the ultimate decisions, the district attorneys that request things. And so when we talk about a backlash or reform or how we do things, what do we really need to address? Do we need different judges, different district attorneys, different legislatures? How do you see reform working?
Well, I mean, this is one of those areas where I'm concerned that there's not a compromise because of the fight. It has so many levels of misrepresentation because you've got groups out there, and let's just say they're activists, but let's just call them for what they are. They recruit soft on crime DAs, and then they send them to seminars once they're elected where they say, quid pro quo, here's the policies you will enact. And then they have another group that issues pseudo studies that say if they enact those policies, it will not affect crime. And then they get press releases from the final group that sells the public on this is good for us and we will not increase crime. And then years later, when crime is increased, then they'll do backup studies saying, well, crime is not increasing because of reform. And so it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all a political agenda. It's not based on truth, but it's packaged as truth. And that's the reason why we're here where we are. So the reforms that we're seeing on the left, the reforms are to tie the hands of the judges so they can't hold anybody accountable. The reforms on the right are to take away the discretion of judges so they can't release people. Because, like in Harris County, they release violent offenders over and over and won't hold them accountable. So the legislature has a bill pending before it to take away some of the discretion to judges so they can't release violent offenders, or the magistrates can't. They have to go before the trial court judge. And so you see the reforms coming from both extremes because of the actions of the judges. And I'd say because the judges are not exercising their discretion based on what's best for the community, they're doing it based on what's best for politics right now, especially on one side of the spectrum.
So does Texas have, oh God, I'm sorry, but does Texas have elected judges? Because in California, we often vote for judges. And I have a constant complaint about it because it's so hard to know very much about the judges. There's not a lot of information.
Yes. Yeah. Texas has elected judges, and so they're elected every 4 years. And once, it's hard to get an elected judge defeated. And so there's not any system that doesn't have a certain level of politics. The problem with what we've got right now is crime is too political, and we need both political parties to become strong on crime again. In some ways, I think we're committing the same mistakes that we did in the 60s. We felt safe. We relaxed our laws. We were more forgiving. Crime started going up. Then we had a fight between the two parties on what was causing it. They wouldn't agree on how to address it. And as a result, we had the backlash, and we had Reagan elected and the war on drugs. And what people don't remember is that movement on the war on drugs that gave us Reagan was started by the minority communities, the pastors in the minority communities, because they were seeing what the drugs were doing to their constituents. So this backlash is going to be worse this time because those very groups are committing the same mistake to a worse level this time than they did in the 60s.
Yeah, and going back to the judges, even with some of the reform things that have gone on, and this is where I'm totally ignorant about this topic, I understood exactly what you were saying is that the judges actually should have discretion on how to apply this, because there's so many factors involved, right? Could be, a relatively minor crime, but this person's been in and out of the system a bunch of times, or vice versa.
Yeah, look at their criminal history. That's the most important thing.
There's so many different elements. And what I'm hearing you say is a lot of that discretion is being removed from the judges, number one. And number two, they have been embroiled now into the whole political sphere, which is always a problem for whatever level.
Well, especially in California. Yes, especially what's happening in California and in New York. We've seen it. They're starting to roll it back there. But they'll start with the legislature will enact a bill that says, here's a list of crimes. And on these crimes, the judge, the trial court, no longer has any discretion. They have to release them on a personal bond, or release them without bond, or release them on zero bail, depending on where you're located. And so, the problem is organized crime, career criminals, gangs see that and go, well, as long as I just commit that crime over and over and over, I have to be treated the same way. So the judges are not even able to look at criminal history. So that's where we're having problems on our low-level offenses, because theft, as long as you commit theft and just theft, if you do it 10, 20 times, those statutes require you to be treated the same way. And if you couple that with these soft on crime district attorneys, where they've been told they will no longer seek enhancements based on your criminal history or based on the amount of drugs you have. Drug dealers who are caught with 20 pounds of meth would normally get 20 years, but soft on crime DAs just charge them with possession of drugs, so they get 2 weeks. They don't get they don't follow the enhancements because that's part of the quid pro quo. Well, drug dealers, they see that as a cost of doing business, spending 2 weeks in jail. And so that's where we've lost all deterrent effect. And our soft on crime, our open borders policy, which is in the middle of ending, that's made it even worse, because, we've got like Mexican cartels bringing their whole drug operations into the United States, like in California, where they decriminalized marijuana. Well, they're moving in and taking over the legal industry and just running them out of the ground. So that any tax dollars being collected are trying to get rid of the legal, but they're bringing in their own workers, and they're not laundering their money through us. They're bringing their whole operations here because they don't have any fear, because we've decriminalized marijuana.
So that brings up sort of another interesting point that I've heard arguments about, like why people are released without bail sometimes, is that the jails and the prisons are so crowded that there's no place to put them anyway, so they have to be released. And when you talk about the migrant situation, like just recently we've heard that that ICE is running out of beds and they're opening up Guantanamo and all kinds of things. So I'm wondering, in your experience, is jail and prison space actually an issue, or is that more like a red herring?
No, it's an issue. In fact, I would say the forced closure of prisons by one party is a backdoor way of forcing criminal justice bail reform. California is a great example, because their state prisons were full, over capacity, and so they had federal litigation over it. And so a panel of judges put a cap on how many people they could have in their state prison system, went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And I would just point out that the minority then is the majority now, so it would have a different result if it happened today. But at the time, it was a 5-4 affirming. So everything that's happened since that case in California, they can call it a Safe Streets Act, they can help safety in school, what they can do, whatever they want to call it. But the purpose of those bills in California was to reduce the prison population because they were capped, and to release more people. And so everything they've done there is to address that, because they refuse to build additional prison space. I mean, Schwarzenegger set aside money to do that, but he couldn't get it done. And there's no politician on the Democrat side in California that would ever propose additional prison space. being built. So they have that backdoor push for reform because they're not going to expand their capacity. And that's probably, whenever I see someone arguing for the closing of a prison, that's what I think of. This is a backdoor way to try to pressure the county to do prison reform, jail reform, criminal justice reform, bail reform. And it's really, really bad because you can't, like you said, when the jails get full, what do you do?
Yeah.
And the first thing you do is you release the lowest level offenders. And when you stop showing accountability to them, they see that as a green light to commit more crime. And so today's low-level offenders are tomorrow's felons.
It's hearing this is just kind of like pulling a string, and unraveling a whole topic, because this reminds me a lot of the homeless topics, a topic that we've discussed over the past. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what is the answer to this, because with the homeless situation, and I'll get to my point in a second. It's like there's a core issue that so many of the homeless have either drug issues or mental health issues, that sort of thing. So how do you ultimately get the right balance to when it comes to bail reform? Bail reform is kind of a little small piece of a much bigger issue, right? Of go back to the prisons. I mean, the argument on the prison part of it is like, well, if you continue to privatize prisons, then the incentive is hey, you want as many prisoners as possible because you got to make money, right? I mean, that's one of the arguments. I'm not saying it's right, but it's, I kind of get that part of it. But what is the right balance? How do you get to the point where your people are being treated fairly, depending on their circumstances when they get into the court system, yet at the same time have the deterrent effect, which I don't think anybody would argue with. I think most people are, very concerned about what's happening in so many communities.
Well, I love that question because I think there's so many layers to it on how do you address that. And so it's very difficult to address all those different layers, in this format, but let me give it a try. So we do have a model that we can look to, and it's, we have this case, which is called Sanchez versus Alabama, that had to live under a preliminary injunction where they had to live under these ludicrous rules for like 4 years as to both misdemeanors and felonies. And so they couldn't hold anybody. And if they screwed up and they came back, you had to release them the same way. So they had to live under that for 4 years. And with all this pressure to settle. And, I did a podcast with the sheriff, and he was just a good old boy who said, this isn't right, we're not going to settle. And so they went up, and after 4 years, they won in the federal court of appeals. And so they went back, they reinstituted accountability, they put consequences on people if they didn't show up for court, and what do you know? Within around 6 months, crime started to go down. So we know what to do to fight crime. I mean, we teach it every day in our criminology classes in colleges. The problem is we've gone through this period where we have activist groups say, don't look at what the numbers from law enforcement, which has historically been the most accurate and what we always rely upon. We've been told for this period of time that they're just blowing smoke at you. Don't believe them. We have the real numbers, and that those are all pseudoscience. So I think part of it is we need to go back to what we know works. Now, the second part of that is once you start doing what works, there will be a period of time where there will be an increase in population or in people in jail because they don't realize that we're starting to be held accountable. When the word gets out that we're going to start having accountability, if we don't do right, then crime will start going down. You can see that just with Trump. What Trump's done with the border crossings have dropped 90% in 2 weeks. I mean, so that matters. But the homelessness issue is so complex because, like you said, there's mental health issues and drug issues. I mean, Portland told us we have this test we're going to do, and we're going to put all this money in counseling and services, and we're going to decriminalize all heavy drugs. And what was it? It was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
We were setting record numbers of overdoses every month. And it's like we're sending law enforcement in to bring somebody back so that they can go get their next dose from the drug dealer. I mean, we're just protecting his clientele. And so they allowed those laws to expire. The experiment was a complete failure. And so we're now in a period where we're re-implementing the system of you either go to rehab or you're going to prison, and which gives us the hammer to give people an incentive to go to rehab. The problem with mental health is I think that is a issue that has eluded a solution. And I'm going to tell you, I have a sister that had mental health issues because she had a car accident, she had a brain injury, and she had it for 30 years. And at the end of her life, I had her declared incompetent, and she was living in an assisted living facility where her medications were regulated. And it was probably those years were some of the best in her life. And so for mental health, I don't think there's very much success without family involvement. But the problem with mental health and drug addictions, they chase off family after a period of time because, they just get tired. And that even happened in my situation. The family got chased off, but after years later, I came back and I was her guardian at the end. So, from their best chance of success is having family involvement. And we don't have any program where we're pushing for family involvement. We're trying to solve it with money, and we're finding in California that just it becomes so much abuse, and money disappears, and it's lining I mean, honestly, you can't conclude anything other than it's lining politicians' pockets. It's not helping anybody.
Right.
I'm curious, sort of along the lines of talking about the complexity of the issue and how to address it, and just sort of the general state of politics in California. I wonder, is the better approach to try and remove regulation and empower judges to have more discretion and go case by case? Or is it a better approach to try and get legislation passed that in some senses ties the hands of the judges, but forces them down the road of stricter bail requirements? Well,
but here's the problem with both when you're tying the hands of the judges on either extreme. Mm-hmm. When you tie the hands of the judges on the left side so that they are forced to release more people, well, that causes crime to increase. The public's not going to stand for that. But when you tie the hands of the judges on the right side of the spectrum and you force more people to be held, that fills up your jails, the public's not going to pay for that. So the compromise between the two is really the private bail industry, because it doesn't cost anything to the public, and it also has the highest appearance rate of any release mechanism that's currently in use. That's the reason why it's been around for 200 years. So what I think the mistake, I think the pendulum is swinging so fast and so hard to the other direction that we're in some sense making the same mistake. But it's because the activists in these areas where judges are elected have now gone in and elected soft on crime judges. So we've got to get them removed from office and then stress the importance of accountability. I think that's going to happen pretty quickly now, because if Trump has any success at all in our inner cities, and he's declared war on gangs and cartels in our inner cities, the difference is going to be so obvious that the public there's going to be a big backlash to the elected officials there. They could have done it. They just chose not to.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, but again, it kind of comes back to that complex equation. That's why I was asking, what is the right balance? Because, and I just think of here in Southern California, where John and I live, you can go to a Carlsbad that's well-to-do, doesn't have a whole lot of crime. You go 25 miles east to Escondido, it's a little bit more of a challenge. And it seems like the measures or the metrics that we have for success is all about keeping the streets safe, which I totally understand that. But to get to that point, how do we go? But how do we go about solving the core issue? Because I agree with you. Family is everything. When family comes together and supports somebody, there's nothing more powerful. Mm-hmm. a lot of these people don't have family, or they're challenged with it, and it's not even within the realm of possibility. And that's where, again, that's not necessarily a fault of the bail system. It's more of a societal, cultural issue. And how do we balance all that? If we're going to measure crime on one hand, how do you measure the ability to have constructive citizens, basically?
Well, I think accountability is what we have to apply. But let me back up. I think you have to start with the premise that I don't think people realize is that we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed on our minority groups. Mm-hmm. And it's by and large being committed by the same minorities. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. I mean, Minnesota just released a study of for 2023, I believe, where they tracked the race of the person reporting the crime all the way through the system for the person arrested, and then how they were treated once they got to the criminal justice system. It was 10-1 on minorities committing more crimes at the reporting stage, which explains why we have more of certain races in the criminal justice to begin with. But once they got to the criminal justice system, this study demonstrated that once they were there, they were treated better than other races when they got into the criminal justice system. So even though there's much more crime being committed, they were treated better than other races once they got there. And that's because we've been told for so long that there's a systemic racism, that they're being mistreated. I do agree with you that the family situation is something that's compounded the problem, but I don't think it's a race issue. I think it's an urban city issue, and we have a lot more of our minorities in our urban cities. Because in our urban cities, the government has failed families. The government has failed schools because we have such high dropouts. They've failed on the fight on drugs, and they've also failed on economic opportunity. And all of those things are compounded in the urban areas. And the reality, though, is if I get, I'm almost 64 years old. If I get to 64 and I can't be a productive citizen, the theory of criminology would say if I am going to continue to be a problem with public safety or a risk to public safety, then the option or the plan would be to put you in prison so that society is safer. That's the whole concept that we have. And so the balance is we're being told by all these groups lies that we need to change the way we've done criminal justice. We know how to do criminal justice, and we need to go back to what works. And honestly, we need to build additional capacity until crime starts coming down.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you to talk the way you do, because in many respects, I feel like you talk the way about things that we do, because it's a multifactorial problem. There's so many issues that impact on it in so many different directions. And in California especially, we have such a narrow view of how to treat any issue. It's throw money at the problem, throw money at the problem, throw money at the problem. And we're generally devoid of ideas or solutions or even the ability to change directions when it's obvious that we're going in a wrong direction. So I really appreciate that your ability to express how many factors are really involved in these things, because that's something that we talk about on this podcast all the time. And as I say, what I'm hearing from you, and I'm just sort of curious if you agree with me, is that because there are so many issues, we just need a greater expanse of ideas to come together to start solving many different problems: homelessness problems, education problems, the way the economics in our big cities are, problem after problem after problem, all of which contributes to, essentially the desperation of people and crime, and that all sort of funnels people towards the criminal justice system. And then once all those people get in the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system has to treat them all in a way that's fair, but also protects society. But
can you imagine? Can you imagine what would happen in California? We can't do this overnight, but if we just said, we're going to pick one homeless encampment and say, all the people with drug problems, we're going to arrest you, and you're either going to go to rehab or you're going to go to jail. And then we take the mental health people and we do the same. You're either going to go to jail because of the crimes that you commit, or you're going to get mental health treatment. And then when we get that encampment taken care of, go to the next one. The problem is we don't have the will and to do that in California and in other parts. But California's policies is attracting. I mean, other states are sending their homeless to California because they're using it as a poster to have these building projects. Because, I mean, I've done debates with people on that side of the spectrum where they're like, we just need to provide these people housing and we wouldn't have a problem anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Is your answer to someone committing murder is we're going to give you a house? And so what happens if they commit another murder? Are we going to give them a summer home? I mean, that's the lack of housing is not the problem. It is contributing to the problem, but that's not the problem.
Yeah. No, and we see that all the time. I mean, as we do, we've spent more money on trying to solve the homeless crisis, and it's only increased. So, and again, it's a very complicated thing. And I think that's starting to come to fruition. Maybe I'm being way too optimistic, that particularly with mental health, that it's great that we want to, I don't think anybody should be living on the streets for all the reasons, right? But just simply giving them a warm shelter is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Well,
you got to figure out a way to help them become those productive citizens, or at least get them to a safe place where they're not harming themselves or other people or camping out on the sidewalk.
I mean, there's this old saying that says, teach a person to fish, and they'll be able to eat whatever. Right. I mean, but or you give them a fish they can eat for today, but you teach them to fish they can eat, whenever they catch a fish. But I mean, that's really where we're stuck at. We're stuck in it providing people's needs, not providing them the means to take care of themselves, and we're failing at the first step of providing them the means. Because the corruption takes over, and it's just so much money, and you have courts trying to take it over to prevent the money from running out so quickly, and they end up building such small facilities for such small number of people at astronomical cost that it's actually not sustainable. You cannot get people. No. You can't get all the people in those types of facilities at the rate they're building and how much they're being spent on them. So that's not an option. And there's not even any recognition that it's not working, because we've got such a political machinery built on top of that. I mean, I've really come to conclude that California is probably one of the most corrupt states in our history right now.
Unquestionably, that is unquestionably true.
And when I decided
did you guys talk earlier?
When Musk trying to increase the number of takeoffs he could have from a military base there, and someone on the state panel that had to approve it, when they denied it, said, we're denying it because we don't agree with his politics, or he doesn't agree with our politics. I mean, in my day, they would have never said that out loud. So in my book, it is so bad right now in California, they're not even afraid to admit what they're doing. We're doing this because you haven't paid us enough money. We're doing this because you haven't spent money on enough of our candidates. We're doing this to punish you for your political views, which I know he sued them for that, but on any other planet, that would be a drop-down suit. You wouldn't even have to worry about it. He's going to have to fight for years to get the result that we all know he should get, and that's because politics is so bad in California.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that point, because we essentially incentivize the politicians in California to keep doing what they're doing, because we keep reelecting them. Mm-hmm. As far as the politicians in California think, they're doing a great job. They get reelected all the time. It's great for them. And so until we can have a different incentive, and what I would say is until we can start electing people who are willing to actually address the problems, because the California politicians won't address anything because it's not in their interest to do so. What if they propose something and it turns out badly? Well, then they risk not getting reelected, right? But as long as they just keep doing the same things they've always been doing, lying in the same way that they've been lying, being corrupt in the same way that they've been corrupt, seemingly they'll get reelected forever.
Yeah, but we have dynasties in politics in California.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Pelosi family. Newsom somehow related to Pelosi. Newsom wants to run for president, although I think the fires killed whatever was left of his chances of running for president. I think he's done. But then we hear Kamala Harris is thinking about coming back home to California and running for governor.
Yeah.
And
she'll win.
she would be, I would say she would be a favorite because they'll clear out the Democrats and anoint her, and then the current state of California is a Republican can't win statewide because they have poisoned just the very name Republican. The Republicans that the people that used to be Republicans that are winning are saying now they're independent, and so we're in this dark period where. But it will end. I mean, I have a lot of hope that it will end because what we're doing is now not sustainable. I mean, look at the budget crisis in California right now. That will they'll have to force some way of addressing it. But eventually, the public's going to get tired of these things always happening like they do.
Well, clearly you've been listening to our podcast.
Obviously, I was quoting you.
Yeah, right. Well. As the recovering Democrat on this call, who's no longer a Democrat, I mean, I think it's just indicative of what's happening really countrywide. Because you can kind of say the same things for certain red states where Democrats is a bad name, right? Where you're not going to be open arm in Iowa.
Absolutely, Texas. Democrats.
Texas is a good example. So, and that's where John and I have kind of come to conclusion that at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of people just want the problem solved. And it's like putting labels, whether they're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. Most people are generally floating towards the middle somewhere. They just want to
solve. The problem we've had for the last 10 years is identity politics, where one party has set up this whole system saying, hey, Bill, you can't vote for Ken because his identity is absolutely opposite to you. And so you don't care about the rest of what he thinks, but you have to say, I not only cannot vote for him, I would like to kill him. And we've had that for 10 years. I think this election ended it because of the economy, also because of the border. But I was telling people before the election, we need to get one party back to being a law and order party. And until we get them back to being a law and order party, we're just going to have more and more problems. So set aside your identity and vote law and order for this election and maybe the next election. And then we can go back to our identity fights because both parties will be law and order again. And I think it's going to take more than this election because the videos that I've seen from the Democrat National Committee electing their new leader and everybody swearing that they were going to have 2 transgender people at least on their group and all these promises that had nothing to do with we're going to make the economy work better, we're going to raise tax revenue, we're going to make, I mean, none of that. It was scary. And so the reason, and the last reason why I say that is Obama had a coalition between Democrats and Wall Street to get elected, and that coalition stayed for Biden. When Harris took over, she tried to moderate her views. I would say changed all of her views 6 weeks before the election to make it appear like she was a part of, so they could support her. But that coalition's dead now that she's lost. I mean, the next presidential candidate from the left, their mindset right now is we weren't liberal enough, and if we were more liberal, we would have won. And so their next candidate will come from that coalition. I mean, if Barack Obama had not been black, they would have nominated somebody from that side of the party. And if it wasn't for Hillary, they would have again nominated somebody from that side of the party. The reason why we had Hillary is because they knew that if they didn't nominate her, they would have been a far left candidate, which would have lost. Now, the DNC chair that they just elected was not supported by Pelosi, was not or Schumer, and they got elected anyway. So they're thinking y'all are just wrong, and so we're going to have a stark contrast unless something changes in 4 years, and it will be ugly for one party. I mean, if they win, they'll do what Trump did. They'll spend the first month undoing everything he did by executive order. But I think that comparison will not play well for them.
Yeah. Well, we probably should start to wrap this up. We try and keep it to 30 minutes. We knew this was going to be a challenge to keep it to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But,
No, it was great to have you on, though. So much enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
thank you. I enjoyed it too.
No, it's absolutely great. And we really started to go down a road where we will go really crazy on the whole campaign finance reform. Because at the end of the day, all of this, I don't care what side you're on, it all comes down to money.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is what is driving everything on both sides.
Absolutely.
Both.
And I know we're winding down, so let me just make this one point. Texas has always been a conservative state. Even when it was a Democrat state, it was a Democrat conservative state.
Oh, yeah.
But now there's no room on in the Democrat Party for conservatives, so they've chased them out. And so in Texas, to be a Democrat, to run statewide, you have to take positions that will then allow you to raise money, but the positions you've taken will negate your ability to win statewide. And so Democrats on statewide races in Texas lose by 13 points now because the positions they take allow them to raise the money to run, but force them to lose the election because we're a conservative state.
Yep. No, it happens both in the blue and red. And that's where, if we had any mantra of this show, I think John would agree, is we've got to figure out a way to de-incentivize from a financial standpoint all this stuff, because it's just it's the political industrial complex across the country.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but is there another candidate, is there another human alive today other than Trump that could have withstood what he went through and won the election? I don't think there's another Republican. I don't think there's another person alive right now that would have been able to withstand the attacks, the litigation, everything, and then have a chance at winning. They would have resigned or withdrawn from the race, or they wouldn't have had the money.
One of the things that I bring up from time to time, and I think it actually, and I'm going to run over, but is that I don't think that people appreciate quite how close we came to really losing our democracy, our election, for the financial suit that was in New York. Trump was on the line for like $500 million. If he doesn't sell his interest in True Social like that day, New York State starts confiscating his campaign finances and locking down all of his accounts. So we were 12 hours away from not having an election.
Well, so the court stepped in and lowered his bond. So
yeah, but he still didn't have the $150 million
in cash.
Barring his ability to get that amount of money, if he's not even able to appeal because he would
be able to appeal, but they could start executing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like that. When you talk about, could any other candidate have come up with $150
and that's what he wanted, though. That's what they wanted. They wanted to be able to start collecting and executing. I mean, it was all about, it was destroying him. I mean, I know we're over, and we all said that now, but Biden's whole strategy for re-election was this litigation, have Trump be convicted, call him a convicted felon, have the Republicans run from him, and then it didn't matter what Biden's mental state was. That was his whole strategy, or their whole strategy, for him to win re-election. And when it didn't work, and I said at the time it wouldn't work because it was too soon. Yeah. I mean, it happened too early. The public is going to forget about it, and that's exactly what happened, or get used to it. But who else other than Trump has a picture being arrested? He makes it a T-shirt and sells it all over the place, and he's mimicking that shot where he lowers his brow, looks at the camera like he's angry. I mean, that's almost his official portrait now as president. If you look at it, he's trying to copy that.
Yeah.
But but as far as the singular candidate goes, just to reinforce this one more point, name me another candidate who ran for president that could have come up on the drop of a dime with $150 million of their own money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
no,
that's crazy.
Well, but also, I mean, there's been a couple of statements made by Trump that I completely agree with, and one of them is we will be studying and seeing movies about these Trump's 2 terms and the elections to get him off for the rest of our lives. I mean, I can just imagine the first movie where it ends with him getting reelected, and all the closing credits are all of these people getting fired, all these people losing their jobs, all these people, these agencies being closed. That's just the start of his second term, and that's just the closing credits. It's that incredible. And then the success he's had in 2 weeks. I'm a Trump guy. I'm one of those people who would have walked over. I would have walked over I would have crawled over broken glass to vote for him because I thought he was mistreated in the White House and for re-election. I think his intelligence does not get enough credit. He is. My favorite meme is of Trump said during the first time in the White House he was doing something he was uncomfortable with. He was pretending to be a politician, which if you think back, that was probably his biggest problem. He was talking when he shouldn't because he's not a politician. But in his second term, the meme was saying he's doing what he does best. That is taking over a bankrupt company.
Yeah. Actually, I would say that's one of the things I've noticed most about Trump from the first administration to the second one is that in his first term, because he was trying to be a politician, he spoke in many respects, I felt, like a politician from time to time, where he was trying to get this canned message across. And you see this all the time with politicians where they're trying to remember what the correct talking points are. They don't just talk. In the second one so far, since he's been elected the second time, he speaks much more just like a regular person. It's just like, I'm just going to tell you what I think, and that's what it is. And so, as I say, I think that his action on reform and his desire to sort of like go for it immediately is what he really needed to do in the first term, and he really wasn't able to. But it's interesting to see it now in the second term.
Well, if he'd have won re-election 4 years ago, he would have had a Republican House, a Republican Senate probably, and he would have probably not been able to do anything and would not have gotten any of his agenda passed, and he would have been a mediocre president. Now he's got a Republican Senate, Republican House for at least 2 years, and he's much smarter, and he's got a man on a mission. I think that the history will treat him very favorably as a result of circumstances. He's benefiting from it, and I thought there's a moment when I thought he's going to win, and there's two things that happened. Number one, he was much more comfortable in the election. I mean, when he was running, he was just very comfortable. But second, when the FBI statistics changed suddenly, and it was discovered a month before the election, and the Democrats have been quoting those statistics for years, saying crime's not going up. Just look at the FBI statistics. And then a month before the election, we discovered that they'd been changed, and they showed crime was going up. They're still incomplete. I'm like, Trump's going to win because they changed that because they don't want to do it after he gets in office. They want to have done it before he gets to office. And I'm like, he's winning, and this is going to be incredible.
Well, on that, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and I would say we should probably get back together in like 6 months and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point because, Grover Cleveland's the only other president who had non-consecutive terms, and he left office with really, really low approval ratings because whatever he did, he continued the mistakes of the first term. And so that's the risk that Trump has is repeating those mistakes. And he may very well do it because he is Trump. But I'm betting on the long shot because he wins every damn time.
Yeah, well,
as I say, it'll definitely be interesting.
And within 6 months, we probably will own Greenland and Panama and the Gaza Strip. So
no, you're missing the point. He never wanted to own Panama. He wanted a better deal. So he started out demanding ownership. And what did he just announce yesterday? A better deal. Our government ships aren't even going to be charged to go through. I mean, people think he means these stupid things. He doesn't. It's negotiation.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll make a day for a few months from now and see how things turn out.
Well,
but all good.
If you're right, you need to get me back and say, told you so, told you so, told you so.
Exactly.
And I'll sit here and I'll just take it. Damn it, you're right. Dadgummit, you're right.
Hey, well, I really do appreciate you coming on. And I think we just, as a country, we just need to have more discussions where we just try and stop calling each other names and just trying to understand, because there's good points on all sides up to a point, not the extremes, but in the middle. So really do appreciate your time.
And
And
again, thank you so much. Pleasure to have met you.
Thank you so much for having me.